to another video. Today is bass trombone day. I've got 5 horns to talk about, every one of which had a trial by fire. I did buy a torch as well, and I had some fun with that. I'll probably make a video about it at another point. But I have a bunch of horns, trials by fire for kind of everything, and a new trombone as well coming up last. First of all, played this a bunch recently. I still love it. I think it's actually strangely, this might seem strange since it's big, heavy, dual bore horn with axials and all that kind of stuff, one of the healthiest horns I have to play. And by that I mean, when I play it a lot, am I ruining my face? Am I ruining my body? Just kind of like using life force to make sound? Not really. Yes, this is heavy. It does take some air, but it's actually pretty efficient, and I don't really have to think about it too much. Just sound comes out. It's pretty efficient, like especially down low when you're using valves. The high range is good. Intonation's not weird. It's so good. It's not perfect for everything. I did use it at Disney the other day, and I did fine, but it would not be my first choice. I've already said in the past I would not use it again at Disney. It just happened to turn out that I kind of needed to, so I wouldn't have to be carrying 2 bass trombones for a whole day. I love this horn though, and I still haven't found anything that's just straight up better. It does need some TLC. The 1981 bell that's not on here right now, this is my Magic Corporation bell, doesn't quite fit. When I put it on here for a while, the second valve starts to gum up and slow down because there's a little bit of tension when I put it together. That's not good, so that needs to be refitted. This bell, I also want to have refit because there's just so much space between the bell and the slide. It kind of projects up a little more than I need. And I feel like there's something else. The linkage is always a little bit hard to deal with. If you use it a lot, all the linkage is adjustable, at least the F lever is, and it'll slightly get out of spec until it starts hitting something. And I just had to deal with that again, which is kind of annoying when you're like playing it on a gig and you're like, oh, this valve isn't going down all the way anymore. So that's a bummer. Otherwise, I love this horn, and I don't really see replacing it at any point, honestly. Next up, trial by fire for the buyers. The Jank horn, another Jank horn. I've had a lot of those. I used this at Disney the other day. I used 3 horns on 3 different days, I feel like. Right? Is that what I did? In any case, played this recently, and I just love it. It sounds so cool. It's got such this like crunchy, grainy sound with like a bunch of color and just so like punchy, but with like an actual genuine Bach core in the middle of it. So it's not just this kind of like nasty shout sound. It's just like this, like really, it's like a singer that smokes a lot or something. I'm not sure of the best way to describe it. I love the sound of this thing. It's not perfect. It's not the most even instrument. With the new tuning slide on here, the reverse tuning slide, the high range is actually a lot better than it used to be. The mid range is very good. Like, probably one of the best of all my instruments. It really just locks in, feels so good to play with like other trombones in the mid range. Once I get below kind of like E flat, D, it starts to get a little stuffy. Just harder to like bang out a note the way I can on some of my other instruments. So I'm not sure if the valves are leaky or if some of the jank here has something to do with it. You can see the alignment here. It's a little jank. I haven't actually looked at this with my boroscope, but I have a feeling there might be some solder blobs and things. So some TLC to be had. I would love to get a new spring for the second valve, so I don't have to have a rubber band to help return it. The linkage itself is just all a little bit jank. And interestingly, I don't remember if it was set up this way the first time, but there's no bracing on these wraps. They just free float. The only thing there is a little bit of solder right here between this U-bend and the tube above it. That's it. Otherwise, they're just hanging out on the valves. They're just soldered to the valves, and they just in the wind. So that might be a bit of a negative. Honestly, I have no idea. Maybe that's a good thing. But I love this. It sounds so cool. Another slight downside is that when I play with tuba players, they really don't seem to like it. It trends so much towards the tenor trombones and not the tuba that they're like, oh yeah, I like your other horn more. I'm like, well, I mean, I like that too, but when you're playing with trombones, it's good to sound like a trombone. This just does. All right, next one. Let's talk about the Chinese EF Duran 555 straight bass. Not a tenor. This is definitely bass trombone. I'm using this on a concert of Beethoven 5 tomorrow. You only play the last movement on Beethoven 5, and there's nothing below an E. And there's, like a few notes in the staff, some B's and things, but it's not that hard to get around. You don't have to go from A sharp to B a bunch or anything like that. So actually the last 2 times I've played Beethoven 5, I've used no valves. Once on a double valve bass trombone, and I just used the slide only. And the time before this, I played it on a large bore tenor. Probably wasn't really the right sound. This sounds so good on that part. It just is like a nice, colorful, warm sound that sounds a little bit louder at a lower dynamic. Because you don't need to destroy the ensemble in Beethoven 5. It's a little bit smaller orchestra. The principal player's on an alto trombone. I don't need to take my monster bass for something like that. This is just about perfect. I would prefer it to have just an F attachment. Maybe at some point I'll put in some time and money and make that happen. For now, I actually kind of like it as is. It plays really well. I had to add a counterweight because it is a little front heavy with no valve, and now it's just about perfect. And I found a good mouthpiece, my Marcinkiewicz Phil Teal. This is actually one of his mouthpieces, and it just plays really well with this. With my real bass mouthpiece, the Mark E87, it's too open, takes too much chop to kind of stay focused. This is just perfect. And I had to add a little weight thing to it because these Marcinkiewicz mouthpieces are so light. They're actually too light, and it gets really kind of nasty if you try and play loud. So this setup, even though it looks weird with a bunch of extra stuff on it, plays really well. And I'll find out in the concert tomorrow how it really goes. In rehearsal, it felt really, really good. Cool. I'm glad that came to something because that's a horn I got for free because nobody wanted it. Second to last, Yamaha 613. I've talked about this a lot. I used it at work. I used it at Disney. I decided to take it to a wind ensemble rehearsal because I haven't really used it outside of kind of commercial settings. I've used it in a big band, I used it at Disney, but I haven't used it in other more legit settings. It plays very easily, I like it a lot, I just want to see how it goes. And it did not do well. It kind of fell flat on its face. When I play loud, I want the sound to broaden, I want it to maintain that nice denseness in the middle, all that kind of stuff. And that's just not what this horn does. I actually just had a conversation with a student somewhere who has a 613G, same thing as this, but with a rose brass bell. And they were looking to get kind of like that Shires or Edwards classical, like broad, but also deep sound on their instrument. And I was kind of like, these horns don't really do that. That's not what they're meant to do. They make a nice broad sound. It's got a lot of color in it. It's got a little bit of punch in it. It doesn't have the same depth that my Box do, for instance. And that's okay. It's not really meant to. It's got a light slide. It's got a pretty light bell. It's got a different taper in the bell. It's got a different tuning slide taper than those horns. So it doesn't really do that thing. And I found that out for myself in that wind ensemble rehearsal where I kind of was like, whoa. It's not that it got really nasty. It's just that I couldn't play it loud with the sound that I wanted. It just kind of reached a point and would not go any higher. And so I learned the limits of it, and that's fine. I'm going to keep using it in those other settings because it does so well in those settings. It is not going anywhere for the moment. It's so light, so easy to play. Sticking around. I'm just not going to use it for classical stuff. Next up and last up is the same thing. It's a Yamaha 613. Whoop, H. So for some reason, Yamaha made the 613 from like 1984 or something like that for a few years. And then they introduced at 613 and 613G at the same time, of course. And then they introduced the H which is a completely different instrument that shares like 2 parts and has the same model number. I'm not sure why Yamaha does this sometimes. They have like a gajillion models, all these different numbers, and then they use the same number for another instrument that's totally different. Anyway, I'm pretty sure this only shares the valves with the 613 no letter. The bells are different, the wraps are different. Oop, there we go. Everything is different, including the linkage. They kind of look similar, but they're not the same. I don't know why they do that, but this is the kind of modernized take on the Yamaha bass trombone. It's a Bach 50 copy with nice valves and an open wrap. That's pretty much it. It's got a Bach 50 taper in rose brass, basically a Bach 50 tuning slide. The slide itself is compatible with Bach 50s, like I can swap them back and forth. I've played this with my Shiro's dual bore, and Edwards sadly bought him out in it, so I couldn't try that. But it's a Bach 50 copy. And what does it play like? It plays like a Bach 50 copy. Plays really well. It's even. It's got a nice beefy low register. The high range is better than my 613. It plays loud and just has that nice nice broad, more depth to the sound kind of feel to it. And because of those things, I'm not going to keep it. I only got it yesterday, and I played it in some quintets, and it felt pretty good. But I was like, you know what? I have Bachs that do this, and I like Bachs, and I don't need another Bach that happens to be kind of shiny. So probably going to sell this. I have some friends that are already interested. It also has the G slide, which was an option, and the original case. The slide's in great shape. The horn itself is like not immaculate, but pretty close for something that's like 25 years old. And like I said, it plays great. It's way better than any of the Xenos I've played. The Yamaha 830, which is the follow-up to this. Usually they have yellow bells, even though there's also a rose bell option. The wraps are just slightly different, a little bit different linkage. And otherwise, they're very similar instruments. And I prefer this in every single way. 830 just is missing something. They're a little bit harder to play on average. They sound so boring. Again, on average, some of them are very good. I've never played one myself. But this sounds really good, plays well, and from what I can tell, they're very consistent at that. So I do recommend this if you're looking for a good instrument on the cheap. This is very good. I have Bachs that kind of do things in more interesting ways or better ways, and I don't need that kind of middle ground that's kind of good. That's not what I'm looking for personally. I have other things to do that, and I have so many more on the way. I just bought a set of Shire's Axials that needs some TLC, and I also have a very spicy bass trombone coming very soon. The most spicy of all bass trombones, yet, and that is on the way. So I will actually own 6 bass trombones at the same time. Hopefully not. I'm going to sell at least a couple of these. I'm not a collector. It's neat having these and playing them. I'm not here to own all of them at the same time, even though I do right now. That's it for now. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.